Welcome back to the Blazor Server in-depth course. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at what we're going to cover in this course. All right, so let's dive deep into what we're going to dive deep into. Let's start with the first thing we're going to cover, which is the basic pieces of Blazor Server. So we're going to talk about how does it all hook up together? What's the basic template look like? How does routing work? How do we even host it in a development environment? And then what happens with error handling? And how do you put new static files in? These are the kind of questions we're going to ask and answer in this first section. This is really just laying the groundwork for what is the basic template even about. You see, a lot of times people get that basic template and then just try to build on top of that. And they miss how it works. And because they miss how it works, they miss how they can change how it works. And they don't know how to fix something if it's not working the way that it's supposed to work. Next, we're going to look at the systems that are included with Blazor. So Blazor, like I said before, is an ASP.NET web application. And that means it brings some things in because it's just a web application. So for example, it brings in dependency injection. So we're going to look at how to use that dependency injection, how to configure it, what the different types of dependencies are, and how to make them work together. Then we're going to look at logging. So logging is also included, and how can we configure it and tweak it, and how to make it work best for our scenario. We're also going to look at the configuration file, because Blazor brings with it all the appsettings.json and appsettings.developer.json, and even the ability to bring in things like Azure Key Vault. It's all kind of baked into the product. And so look at that. And finally, Blazor uses Bootstrap 4. And so we're going to look at what Bootstrap 4 is and how to make best use of it so that we can make really nice user interfaces. We're also going to look at how it only uses part of Bootstrap 4 in order to keep that download small. It's really trying to be efficient here and not bring everything. It's just bringing the piece that really we'd have to redo ourselves anyway. And so it does that through Bootstrap. Number 3 is how to build pages. This may seem like it's a small section, but it's really not, because there's a lot going on with a page. We're going to talk about how is it even laid out. Because when you create a page in Blazor, it's just a little bit of HTML and C#. That's it. And so how does it get the header and the body, and how does it bring in CSS and JavaScript? And then how does it work to actually populate this page? Where does that menu come from? All those kind of things. We're going to talk through those. We're going to build our own pages and then see how the code works and how to separate the code from the HTML. We're also going to look at the Razor syntax and how to use that to connect our C# with our HTML. And finally, we'll look at layout pages and talk about how usually people just assume there's one layout, but you can have multiple layouts for different scenarios. And so we'll see that. So instead of the navigation on the left, maybe one page doesn't need navigation at all, and so we take it off. Or maybe it needs navigation on the right. Or maybe you don't have a header. And so we'll talk through all those different scenarios and how you can build a layout page to match. The next section after that is how to build and use components. And the reason this is right after pages is because the little secret of Blazor is that every page is actually just a component. So we're going to look at how to bring in a page, a whole page. We're going to bring it in as a component and maybe bring it a couple times. So we'll bring a counter in like 4 times and see how that can come in as just a little piece of an overall page. Because Blazor creates these components that we can then compose. And we can bring in a piece here and a piece there and kind of mix it all together and layer on top of each other to create this rich system that is powerful, but yet every component is small, tiny, and easy to understand. Think of it kind of like when you're developing code, you could put all of your C# code in one method, but it's a lot easier to create classes and create small methods inside those classes and kind of reuse them. And that's what we're going to do with components. Now, with components, you can also send data to them and even send other components as parameters. You can also send data out of them through events. And so we'll look at how to do all of that with components. Next up, forms. I dedicate a whole section to how to get data from the user. In the first lesson, we get the easy forms out of the way. We see what a form is, we do a very easy form, and we see how to create the form, how to get data out of the form, and so on. But then we start kicking it up a notch. We get into validation, how to very easily add validation to our forms, and to all different types of validation, whether it's bools for checkboxes, or ints, or doubles. So a numeric box, but one takes only whole numbers and one doesn't. And how to do string validation, and the list goes on, even dates and how to display those. But then we go even further and bring out an advanced form scenario. In fact, this form scenario includes cascading dropdowns. So when you select a value in the first dropdown, it shows a second dropdown that now has information based upon the first dropdown's selection. So we go through that and how to set that up. And then we're not done, because then we get into how to upload in Blazor, upload files, that is. And so we'll even create a drag and drop file uploader for our site. So that's all about forms, because forms are really important. And I want to make sure that you really understand how to use forms, because that will be a big part of what you're building with Blazor server apps. Number 6 is how to use authentication. So if you're going to have forms, or you're going to capture information, or even display information, you probably want to limit who can do what. So in this section, we're going to add authentication in 2 different ways. First of all, there's a checkbox when you create the template. We're going to use that checkbox to add authentication. And then we'll see how it's all set up and how it works and how to configure it and how it is designed. But then we're going to create a new Blazor app that does not have authentication. And then we're going to add authentication to it later, because that comes up as well. That will teach you even more about how authentication is configured, because we'll have to reconfigure it manually, and we'll do that. But then we're not done then, because we also want to talk about authorization. So authentication is you logging in and saying, I am Tim Corey, and it says, okay, based upon your password, yes, you are. That's authentication. But with that, going hand in hand, is authorization. Now that you're logged in, what are you allowed to do? And so we'll talk through how do we configure this. And we'll configure things like roles so that I can be an administrator, but somebody else might not be an administrator. And so how does that change what we see? So we'll have certain pages you cannot go to unless you're logged in. Other pages you can't go to unless you're logged in and are a part of this role. And then we'll even do things like showing and hiding menu options based upon what your roles are, or what if you're logged in or not. Okay, so we'll really get deep into authentication, but also authorization. In number 7, we're going to build a data access system. And we're going to do this with Microsoft SQL Server. But we're going to build this in a way that is separated from our user interface so that we can replace it easily. In fact, by the end, we're going to replace it. So we'll build out a SQL Server database, a tiny one, and we're going to connect. We're going to create a full CRUD operation. So we'll have creating data. We're going to have reading data and displaying a set of data on the screen. We'll have updating data, and we'll have deleting data. So we'll do all of the major CRUD operations with our data access. But then we're going to take that and we're going to swap out the entire data access for an in-memory data access solution instead. Just to show how easy it is. It takes us about 10 minutes, maybe less, to swap out our entire data access layer for an in-memory data access layer instead. So that's going to give you the ability to create data access using anything. Even though we did it in SQL, you could do it in MySQL, in SQLite. You could even take the same principles and do it with NoSQL solutions like Cosmos DB or MongoDB or CouchDB. So this really allows you, with one example or one way of doing it, it's going to show you how to do it with pretty much any way of doing it. So that's data access. Then we get to the fun one, how to deploy Blazor Server. So it's great to build a web application, but if you don't know how to put it into production, then what good is it? And so we're going to tackle how do you deploy Blazor Server, but not to one place, not to two places, but to 3 different unique places. First, we're going to configure IIS on our local machine. So Internet Information Server is the de facto Windows hosting platform for web applications. So we'll configure it locally, and then we'll deploy to it, and I'll walk you through all the steps of getting it installed and getting it configured and getting it running so you have your web server running on your machine. Not just IIS Express in development mode. This is full IIS, and it will work independent of Visual Studio. Then in the next lesson, we're going to set up a hosting platform. In fact, I've included bonus videos for you on how to buy a domain name and how to register with a web host. And then we'll take that web host and we'll deploy our Blazor server to the web host, and we'll make sure it runs. And we're not done yet, because then we're going to take another Blazor server app and we're going to deploy it to Azure Web Apps. And we'll see how to configure that and change that and tweak that. So whether you want to deploy your Blazor server to a server or to a web host or to the cloud, I've got you covered. Okay? So that's the 8 major things we'll be covering, the 8 major topics. Now, for each of these topics, we're going to go even further. Each topic in the section introduction is going to introduce you to some homework. And this will be homework that will help you dive deeper into your learning. Really make sure you understand what you've learned. But then, in every section conclusion video, I'm going to show you how I would do the homework. That way, you can also see how I would do it and see if you missed something. So every section will have a bonus lesson and a bonus application that we'll create. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of things to cover, but when you come out of this, you are going to be almost an expert, if not an expert. Okay? Expertise comes with practice. So I don't want to practice, or I don't want to say they're going to be something you're not. But if you practice this, you will be an expert at Blazor Server. This covers the entire foundation. It goes really deep into Blazor Server so you know it inside and out. Because I want you to be great. I want you to succeed at Blazor Server, and this in-depth course is going to get you there. You just need to follow along and do the work alongside. Practice what you learn, and you will be an expert in Blazor Server. So once you're ready, go on to the next section and get started at becoming a Blazor Server expert.